Good afternoon, this is Sherry Blanton and I'm at the Public Library of Anniston-Calhoun County. You usually see me with my garden clothes on because I love gardening, but today I'm talking about my second love, which is the Jewish population in Calhoun County, Alabama. In about 1995, I looked around at the members of Temple Bethel and I realized that we were all getting older, and that these folks had such fabulous stories to tell that I wanted to get with them on an individual basis and talk with them about their lives and their stories and what magnificent stories they had to tell. And from there we went to a photography exhibit that we had at the library. With the help of T. Morgan, I got a lot of wonderful Russell Brother pictures, and from there we went to a large exhibit that traveled all over the state. And I suggested to Teresa that we do something about historical buildings, especially the ones that the Jewish merchants ran and had businesses in. And with the help of Stephen and Linda in the Alabama room, we have come up with a beautiful presentation for you. They were both so helpful, and I could not have done this without their assistance, and I remember the kindness of T. Morgan as she helped me put this together. We're going to call it Special Spaces, Special Stories, Anniston's Historical Buildings Used by Early Jewish Merchants. Before we get started, I want to mention one thing to you. Most of you may know that Anniston was a closed company town, and you didn't get to come in unless you were invited in. But in 1884, the train got here, and the town opened up soon after that, and Jewish merchants who were all around the South rushed in to open stores because in the countries they had come from, they couldn't do anything but be dry goods or sell things, and they came from all over the South to run businesses, especially the Sternes and the Sachs family. And for a while there, I'm going to say that most all of the stores on Noble Street were run by Jewish merchants. And we're going to look at their buildings, hear their stories, and I decided to make it easier for you to know where their buildings were, that I would walk up and down Noble Street, and I would take pictures of where their buildings used to be to give you an idea of where their stores were and what is now on Noble Street. I hope you enjoy this as much as I enjoyed putting it together. It was a great learning experience for me. The first store that we're going to look at was N. Ory's Dry Goods. Nathaniel Ory opened N.E. Ory's Dry Goods at the corner of 10th and Noble. This is one of the things that I had to learn. There is a historical address and a present address. And the historical address that may have been in the old directories is not the same as the address is now. So this has been a learning experience for me to figure out that what was 1028 is now 1026. Ory's is located in what had been called the Constantine Building. And you see across the top where it's written the Constantine Building. This store opened in 1913. In 1922, he moved his store again. Well, what happened to Nathaniel Ory is he got really, really busy. I mean, he was doing tremendous business. And is this not a magnificent building here on the corner of 10th and Noble? I know people ride by it and look at it and wonder what it might have looked like in the day. Well, Nathaniel Ory got so big that he moved. But before I get to the second building, I love this picture of the Constantine Building. I love this view of old Anniston. This building is still there. However, in 1940, Sears Roebuck removed that third floor. And so this picture was taken somewhere between 1917 and 1923. N. Ory's store was there, his dry goods store, and the city grocery store. And back even before that, in 1887, Joseph Sachs had a store there called The Famous. But if you can look all the way to the rear, you'll see the Peerless. The big story about the Peerless and this building that I was told by one of our Jewish residents, that there was a catwalk between the Constantine Building and the Peerless. The Peerless on the second floor used to have a house of ill repute, and there was a catwalk. So the men could walk through the catwalk and go in stairs and visit the ladies without being seen actually going into the building. There is no historical evidence of this. This was just told to me by a longtime Anniston resident, and I like the story, so I kept it. This is the Constantine Building in 2021, without the third floor. Well, as I said, Nathaniel Orey got really busy, and his status in life increased, so he opened another department store called The Fair. And it was located in the Hill Building at 1006 Noble Street. I'm sorry I left out the word Noble. I don't know if this building is still there or not, but he had 3 complete floors, and he made it like the department stores in the big cities. He had a barber shop for women and children. He had a beauty parlor for women only, a restroom and a playroom for mothers, and a shoe shine place for women. He had a bargain basement, a steam heat, and an elevator. It closed in the 1930s, but this was a really forward store. He was really catering to women. This was the first floor of the fair. And look here, ladies, we can get a nightgown or whatever for $1.59. You could get a teddy, I think is what that says, for 59 cents. Gone a long way, but I love the inside of this old building. This is the bargain basement in the fair, and it looks like this might be the floor that really catered to women. But I even love the edges around the ceiling. The crown molding is really beautiful. It looked like he spared no expense. The next merchant we're going to talk about is Leon Ullman. Leon and his brothers came from Talladega because they heard there was big business going on in Anniston, Alabama. So he bought what was called the Woodstock Company store in 1884. Prior to that opening of the city, the only store was the Woodstock Company store, and all the people who worked in the Woodstock business shopped in this one store. So Leon opened it. It's on 10th and Noble, and he said he sold dry goods, millinery, clothing, carpet, and carpets. I'm not quite sure why he wrote it that way, but he did. This was a long time ago. He was one of Anniston's earliest Jewish merchants. As I say, he came over here because things were big time. This photo is about 1885, and this building is no longer in existence. But I love the streets and the buggies going down them. If you ever wondered why Noble Street is the way it is, look at what kind of traffic we had. So this is the site of Ullman's, 1001 Noble Street. It has been called the Lyles Building, the Commercial National Bank Building, the 10-story building, the Watermark Tower, the Sea Palace, and the Watermark Tower. And I appreciate Stephen finding all those things out for me, because that's kind of interesting to see what this building has been. I did not know that they called it the 10-story building, and when I was talking to one of the librarians, she said, "Oh, the 10-story building," and I thought she was describing it, and that was actually the name of it. Ullman Brothers, this was about 1897 on Noble Street. You can see where the streetcar was going, and I don't think it's been that long since they covered those up. In the early 1900s, he began to sell women's clothes only instead of a line of general merchandise, the carpets and the dry goods. And I really love this old picture of what Anniston, Alabama looked like. It's a treasure, and you can see across the top where it says Ullman Brothers. Then Ullman moved to the corner of 11th and Noble. This happened in the 1960s, and this was about 10 years before it closed, this picture. And I have to say that we moved here in 1971, and this is where I bought my clothes. And the best thing I bought was a pair of hot pants and a bodysuit, and they had lips all over it because that's how you dressed in the 1970s. But it was a wonderful woman's store, and they catered to you, and the service was wonderful, and it was eventually sold. And here is Ullman's now on 11th and Noble, and what I'm so thrilled about is it had fallen in terrible shape. There was holes in it. It was just, I don't want to say it was disreputable. I'm trying to avoid that word. I'm just saying it didn't look very good. Okay, we'll leave it at that. Somebody bought it, and they have repaired it, and it's really nice now. And I hope that there'll soon be a business in there. But it really had gotten so sad looking, and I had such fine memories of this wonderful store. This is another early Anniston. His name was Anselm Sterne, opened Sterne's Groceries, fancy groceries, fruits, and confectionaries, according to the 1889 Anniston City Directory. Anselm Sterne came to Anniston in about 1887 or so, and he had been a prisoner of war up north and had come back south, and he was looking for a place for his family to live. He was riding on the train. He met one of his Confederate officers, and he said, "Give Anniston a try." So he got off the train, and he stayed. He had a wonderful, wonderful family of generous, successful children. He had a wonderful wife. He and his wife, Henrietta, were responsible for building the temple, but it was in the Caldwell Building, and this is the Caldwell Building. And I love it because they delivered their fancy lines of food in a horse-drawn wagon. The store moved to 1009 Noble, and then it moved to 1130 Noble Street and became L.A. Sterne Groceries. Leon Sterne is very well known, especially in Rotary. They still have a Christmas fund named after him. But this is still just an incredibly beautiful building on the corner. The last thing I saw there was a bar, but I haven't seen it there in a long time, so I think it's empty. But it's a look at what old Anniston looked like. This is Run's department store. This is one of my favorite pictures. I think they must have been having a 4th of July celebration with all the flags and the carrying on. And this picture was taken about 1905, and it's located at 1030 Noble Street. It eventually became the building where Griffin's Jewelers is. Griffin's is closed. It sold ribbons, velvet, silks, flowers, feathers, lace, hats and dress goods, trunks, gloves, corsets, and toys. And it was owned by Samuel Run, but his wife was a very big part of this building and the store, and she was very well known in Anniston, Alabama, because she must have been in the store with him. But I don't know, that just looks like 4th of July to me. I could be wrong, but it looks like some sort of patriotic celebration. Run's store is 1028 Noble Street. It is where Griffin's is, and you can sort of see what it looked like, and I believe this store is empty. It's now 1028 Noble Street. A lot of the stores actually changed addresses. This is Yalovitz's pawn shop. There are probably still people here that remember Joe Yalovitz and the pawn shop. it became the diamond jewelry store, and it is now the Peerless. But what I have to say about this shop is he came in and didn't know any English and did great in the shop. It looks like guns in the cabinets. I'm not really sure what was sold there. But he built a huge house over there across from the Woodstock Building, and he evidently fared very well in Anniston, Alabama. Here, the diamond jewelry store in 2021 is the Peerless, located at 13 and 15 West 10th Street. And the Peerless has held steady and still looks beautiful, but you can see those top floors where maybe somebody came across on a catwalk from the Constantine Building. But it's a lovely old building. I really, really like this picture. This was the Theato Theatre. It was remodeled in 1916. I love all the fretwork on the front and the decorations, and it looked like one of the finest theaters you could possibly imagine. It was run by Walter Levi. Its historical address was 1026 Noble Street. 1026 Noble Street. We're not really sure that may have been the actual address. This was about 1924. And the Anniston Star said it was artistic in every detail, refined and elegant, as well as convenient and spacious. It actually moved to where the Woolworth building was. Later, the site, the Theato was part of not where the car is, but maybe the next building over. And then the Woolworths became the Rabbit Hutch. So they were playing Red Hot Leather with Jack Hoxsey in December of 1926. And actually that became part of the classic. But what a great picture of Noble Street and the parallel parking and the signs and the gorgeous designs on those buildings. I'm really in love with this photograph. Here is the Theato today. Its historical address is 1026 Noble Street, but it is located in what is now the right side of the classic. Okay, the Rabbit Hutch is now 1028 Noble Street, and it became, at that point, it was 1028, and later on, it became 1026. So you can see how complicated it was for me from Jacksonville, Alabama, to try to figure out what these addresses were. But Stephen explained to me that most of these places had historical addresses and that they changed over time. But that is the right part of classic, and that was the theater with the big archway. Sterling Jewelers. Is there anybody who doesn't remember Hyman and Selma Gordon? This is 1029 Noble. He was a diamond merchant. I think this picture was taken somehow around the 70s. He opened it in 1946, and he finally retired in 1987. And his daughter and his grandson have remodeled Sterling's, and it's for lease, and it's really beautiful. It's a nice building, and I know they're hoping that somebody will rent it, but it's really quite attractive. Berman's department store. That was one of the big deals in early Anniston. This was built by Jake Berman, or Jake Berman, and his wife, and they were the parents of Farley Berman. They built this store. They carried a full assortment of clothing, ready-made garments, millinery carpets, and other lines which made up a well-equipped store. They also owned a dry goods store on West 10th Street and the 1100 block of Noble Street. So this was about 1913, and this was on the corner at 1230 Noble Street. I am guessing that most of you or some of you may remember when this was Anniston Community Theater. And then maybe you remember when someone came in and painted it purple. I don't remember who that was. I just remember that it was purple there for a while. But it still has a lot of interesting detail on the corner. The other thing I had to figure out, that something was on the 1100 block, but the address was not 1100, it was 1000. Anyway, I got very confused, and I am grateful for Stephen for just being so patient till I finally understood the difference in the addresses. But it's a very nice store. This is Berman's Department Store 2021. It's not purple anymore, but it's still, you can see a little bit of purple around the top, but it is a ceramics shop. I showed this picture to somebody and they said, "Boy, is this gory." I said, well, it was the times. I used it because I loved the sign on the back that says Berman's Department Store. Well, Berman's Department Store was located next to the hanging tree. And you can see the number of people who've come out to watch the hanging. And evidently a hanging must have been like a big deal. Because you see there's a man in the tree, and the ladies have their umbrellas, and they brought their horse and buggies in, and they're standing all over the top of Berman's. But we have to remember that this was a lot of years ago, and times have changed, but that's kind of an interesting tree to go with the jail. And you can all see everybody sort of looking over the wall where the hanging's going to be. This is Noble Street, about 1940. Berman's Department Store had actually moved to 1112 Noble Street in 1930s, and I think if you look hard enough you can see their sign. But another wonderful glimpse of Noble Street. This was the interior of Berman's about 1935. I love the old fans, and look how neat everything is stacked. It's just an incredible photograph. The Russell brothers were geniuses. This is Gayle's. Gayle's was run by Jack and Sam Routman, and I'm sure there are a lot of people who still remember Mr. Sam. He's over there on the right-hand side with the glasses, and that's his brother Jack in the beginning. Sam Routman bought the top floor of Berman's and merged Gayle's to become Berman Gayle's in the late 1970s. I spent more time in Berman Gayle's than I did anywhere else that I went. Mr. Sam was always in there telling us some jewel about Anniston's history, and his two sons, Richard and Gary, were in there, and it was just the place to go to get your clothes. This is the new Berman's. This is what happened in 1999. This is what it looked like. And then this is what it looks like today. It is the courthouse annex. Doesn't look much like Berman's, but you can recognize the building. This is Rosen's store. This is one of my very particular favorites. Jimmy Rosen was an unassuming, short guy with, it was on 17 West 10th Street. This is about 1981. Do you see how neat every single thing was hung up in there, and the ladder that he had propped up, and he slid the ladder along, so if he had to get anything down, the ladder sort of moved. I actually went in that store when it was closing, and I bought a pair of little girls' patent leather shoes as a memory. Before it was Rosen's store, it was Sam Schauer's store. Sam Schauer was very early in Anniston. He started this store in 1898. The geographical address, the historical address was 17 West 10th Street, and that may still be the address now. Jimmy Rosen bought the store when Sam Schauer died in 1935, but I do love this picture of this beautiful window. I can't say anything but that this is now Jimmy Rosen's store. Jimmy Rosen was a great philanthropist. He never left town. I don't think he spent any money on himself. And when he died, he left a huge estate. And I've been on that board, and we have given thousands of dollars away to nonprofits in Calhoun County, and we are thrilled to be able to carry on in his name. He was very unassuming, but he left a wonderful gift to many people. There's Jimmy in his store. I didn't show everybody's picture, but he's a very special individual. I love this picture. This was given to me by Rita Springer and her husband, Donald. This is Donald's father's eye store. He was Nathaniel E. Springer, optometrist. This picture is about 1920. It was located at 1031 Noble Street. That was the historical address, and the present address is 1029 Noble Street, and the way you knew where it was is it was next to the First National Bank. I really love this window. I just think it's fabulous, and I'm grateful to whoever took this picture so we could always have it. And Anniston Optical Company, Stephen found this photograph for me, and if you look, you can see the eye down there to the left of the lamppost. It's right next to the First National Bank of Anniston. You see the Anniston Optical Company, you see the Singer store, and then you see City Bank and Trust. And neat store, love the lights, love the canopy over the stores. Eventually, Dr. Springer moved his office to the 10-story building at 10th and Noble, or as it's called, 930 Noble Street. And that is a beautiful building that I know by the clock. This is another great favorite of mine. Great favorite of mine as far as the picture and the store. This was the famous One Price store, or the famous. It was opened by Joseph Sachs. Joseph was a nephew of the Sachs family of Saks Fifth Avenue. When Anniston opened up, they sent Joseph to Birmingham. And then they decided, no, let's not send him to Birmingham, let's send him to Anniston, where he opened a store. He sold only men's clothes, and he named the store for his dog, Famous. And it was located in the Constantine Building. Later it became Ori's store because Mr. Sachs moved around. And that's another thing I've learned that I have to point out to you. Not only did some of these places have two addresses, that their owners moved around a lot. And sometimes you weren't always able to find where they had moved, and then there would be a picture and you didn't realize that it was in a different place. Because here's another Oxon picture. Okay, it's now the famous One Price Tailor and Hatters. I don't know if you can see it. It's on the corner and it's written on the building. This picture was about 1900. By then, the Famous had moved from 10th and Noble Street to a new location, the Smith Building. And the Smith Building is not there anymore. And there is the Famous, Clothiers and Furnishers. It carried men's, boys, and children's clothing, and I remember seeing an ad that they had Hart, Schaffner, and Marx suits. Okay, if you'll see the very dashing man in the front row with his hand in his pocket, that would be Joseph Sachs. And I think this is just a fabulous picture and a look at a time that's gone by, but we can remember through photographs. Here is one of his ads. I just thought it was neat when I read it. The Famous Head-to-Foot Outfitters, Joseph Sachs and Company proprietors. And for those who may recognize the Sachs name, His son was Hank, or Andrew. He and Betty were very popular in Anniston. Betty helped with Knox concert, and they were always in the very front row at Knox concert series, holding court and visiting with everybody. Hank knew the greatest stories about Anniston. The greatest stories, and I'm going to share one of them with you that he told me, and he said, don't tell anyone, and then he told somebody else, so I figured it was mine. His mom worked in the store, and the lady who ran the house of ill repute used to come in and buy Christmas presents for her customers, the ties. And then after Christmas, Mrs. Sachs would notice who was wearing the ties. And that's one of the greatest stories that Hank ever told me. I really love this ad. Here's where it says he sells Hart, Schaffner, and Marks. Another story that Hank told me about him and his father is that they worked through the Red Cross, and they went down to the train station, and they met the boxcars full of soldiers who had died from the Spanish flu, and he used to take Hank with him down to the train station. And Hank told me all about that story. Hank was an Anniston treasure. This is the famous. It's a parking lot, and there is a little garden right there, and I've parked in there many times, and you see the courthouse behind it. Here is another view of Noble Street with Saks Clothing. You see the Saks sign, and the Anniston Star said the whole store is a veritable bazaar for mankind. And he only sold men's and boys' wear, and he had renamed it Saks Clothing. But you can all see the sign and the nice awning that he had on it. Believe it or not, we had Pizitz's over here. There were lots of Pizitz's in Birmingham. There were Pizitz stores everywhere. Well, they came to Anniston and they had a store. It was the Pizitz Building, and it was open from 1917 to 1935, and the store closed in 1932. I wondered if it was English Village, and I tried to compare the addresses, and I don't think that it was, but I could be corrected. There are probably not many parents here who don't remember going into Kingsley's shoe store and buying the little red shoes for their little boys and girls, because I sure did. Gayle's store and Kingsley's store were located on Noble Street next to English Village. And the stores were run by Lena and Ben Applebaum. Gayle's was operated by Sam and Jack Routman. What they did was they opened, you can see Gayle's, but you see that the writing has gotten kind of faded. They put an arch between the two stores so you can go between stores to get your shoes or your dresses. And this was an exquisite building. This is Gayle's and Kingsley's in 2021. It's a parking lot now. This is another neat old building. This is the Caldwell Building. Last I knew, the Caldwell Building was a bar. But at this point in time, about 1929, it was run by Rudolph Hertz, and he sold clothing, hats, and men's furnishings. He sold it in 1918 to C.B. Friel. So you see Friel's sign there, but you also see the globe. And if you look down about 2 doors, you can see a store called Boutwell's Clothing. It had been the Beehive store, owned by another Jewish merchant, Alfred Adler, and it had been Alfred Adler and Adolph Adler and Company, and it was at 1007 Noble Street. Some of you may say to me today, you know, that's not really the address, but understand that we looked at historical addresses. But the Caldwell Building pretty much still looks the same. Here it is today, and it's really glorious. Kaplan's Bargain Barn. This is a neat story. we had a Russian Jew came to Anniston, and his name was Kaplan, Louis Kaplan. He had Kaplan's Bargain Barn. I think this is a wonderful shot. It was the 800 block of Noble Street next to the Kaplan Building. Mr. Kaplan wanted to build a hospital and have his name on it. So he wanted to be called the Kaplan Hospital. So he gave the initial plot of land or the money or whatever that has become Regional Medical Center, and there is a plaque to him somewhere in the lobby. This is another tremendously interesting story. This is Louis Kaplan's building in 1908. He had another building. It became the Cobweb Corner. I don't remember that store, but there may be people who did because I'm not sure about the year of those cars. But he developed the whole block between 8th and 9th, and it was called the Kaplan Block. Well, when he built this, it was Warnock's, and I think I remember Warnock's. I'm not sure if anybody else does, but I have a vague memory of it. Anyway, this store was built of heart pine, and as you know, we use heart pine for kindling. This store caught on fire, and the news article I read said that you had to stand across the street because this fire was so hot. The heart pine just went up. So that was the Kaplan Building. Stephen was really helpful for me with this one. We had a gentleman by the name of Max Markstein. He was an alderman, Confederate gentleman. He came to Anniston and he bought a saloon from Joseph Magnus, who was yet another Jewish person. It's at 930 Noble Street. It was on the first floor of the Opera House, which isn't there anymore. It was a large building. The theater was on the second floor, and there were a lot of buildings on the first floor, and one of them was the Opera House bar. And on 10th and Noble, and I really liked the ad. He eventually got into selling different kinds of liquor and moved his building. This is not the building. This is only the site of the Opera House bar in case you wanted to know, well, where was it? This Heilig Myers was in there for a long time, and I think there might have been another store after that. But this building, the Opera House bar, the Opera House and the Opera House bar were torn down. And at some point, someone put up this building, but just to give you an idea of where it was, this building is still standing. We had yet another Jewish citizen who owned a bar, and his name was Isadore Levi, and it was at 1022, 1024 Noble Street. Well, y'all are going to recognize those addresses. That's classic on Noble Street. And this was another thing. I love 3 for 25 cents smoke, and he sold the Duke of Sunderland, the finest 10-cent smoke in the world, and all the different kind of liquors. He sold Budweiser, imported ale, sherry, and this is his building, Levi and Company. It's now classic on Noble, and if you'll look where the arch is on the farthest right, that was where the theater was. But that building, they have done a beautiful job of keeping it, and at one point it was a saloon. I can tell you a really neat story about Mr. Levi. I've got to check my time so I don't overtalk. I have his obituary, and it says he was buried in the Jewish portion of Hillside Cemetery. I have looked all over that graveyard and cannot find him. All I can think of is they didn't put a headstone, and I can imagine one day we go up there and start digging and we find Isadore Levi, because I can't believe that the newspaper made that kind of mistake. But classic on Noble was a bar. we had another gentleman by the name of Julius Levy, who was a merchant tailor. He came here about 1901. Now, he moved a bunch. He also said that he was in the Columbian Building, and he had given an address, but we can't find the Columbia Building at any of the addresses he told us it was at. And like Stephen said, he moved several times anyway, but I don't know if anybody has ever seen or knows about the Columbian Building, but we found 2 different addresses for it. I know that this is not a Jewish merchant's building, but it is downtown. It means a lot to me. It's our temple. It's very historical, has been kept like it was from 1893. Excuse me. And I decided to include it since we were talking about historic Jewish places. Temple Beth-El was paid for by the Ladies' Hebrew Benevolent Society. They organized in 1890. Anselm and Henrietta Sterne convinced the ladies that if we had a building, that Judaism would stay. Do you mind? I'm going to take just a sip of water so I don't cough. I never knew how to take a sip of water on a Facebook's live stream, so I've just tried it and it worked. They held all kind of fundraisers, including oyster dinners. Jews didn't eat oysters, but these Jews served oyster dinners. They paid $1,500 for the lot that they bought from the Anniston Land Company. They spent $2,400 for the building. It was like $2,422. And they told the men, you may build a temple, but you cannot go into any debt. They gave it to the congregation in 1907, debt-free. Excuse me. And this is the cornerstone. And my eyes are not as good as they should be, but it was, so I'm having trouble reading what's on the bottom, but it was erected by the Ladies' Hebrew Benevolent Society in 56-53, the Hebrew year, or 1893. And it still sits on that corner, and I think that I may have a translation of what is written on that stone, and I'll try to find it while we go to the next slide. Let's see if I see what was on the. Nope. Sorry, I don't have what was written on that. Maybe y'all can read it. This was Temple Beth-El. Shortly after it was built, that's what it looked like. And it was really very, very charming. I love the tower. We don't have the chimney anymore because it pretty much collapsed, and someone looked at it and said, ma'am, I don't know how that chimney's still up there 100 years later, so we did have to take it down. Our stained glass windows are still there. If you can look over on the left side, and if I can get this little thing to work. All right, if you look on the left side by the fence, you'll see the magnolia tree that's there now. It's maybe about 5 feet tall, and its towers way over the building now. But these very frugal ladies put this chicken wire fence up in 1894 because there was nothing else there. And then they took it down in 1908 and they made $2.75. I love these ladies. I really, really do. I think they were just a gift to this Jewish community even today. This is a glorious picture of Temple Beth-El from 1898. It was the only building on the 1300 block of Quintard, and there were 2 houses on the 14th. And the men on horseback were soldiers stationed at Camp Ship in Anniston. And They were just riding their horses up Quintard, and the camp housed Spanish-American war troops. But hey, can you imagine Quintard now with a bunch of soldiers marching up in their full uniforms on Quintard? Boy, they would get some looks. This is a picture I just took of Temple Beth-El about 2 weeks ago. And you can see that same magnolia tree in the background. I have to mention that the menorah, which is the candelabra on the tower, was given to the temple in honor of Alfred Caro, who owned the Anniston restaurant. It was given anonymously to the temple. We have no idea who paid for it. It was given in his honor because people loved him so much. George Parker, who was an architect, wrote this beautiful description of the temple. The small but handsomely proportioned single-story building has a rather Byzantine design inspiration, and the arch-transformed doorways accenting arch windows and arch relief of the facade create an exquisitely scaled composition well related to the narrow corner lot. Those who have ridden by know we're teeny. We have sort of a long lot, but it's not wide. And back in those days, they didn't have parking lots. So we still don't have a parking lot, but we have a beautiful building, and it's been planted by me. And I'm very proud of what it looks like and how it's been maintained. I thought I'd throw in this picture. You can see the temple in the background, but this was Quintard, about 1930. And if you'll look over through the trees, you can see the Berman apartments. And that is where Farley's mom and dad lived. And Farley's mom took care of the temple. She was there all the time. She loved it. She did plays. And I understand from what I've read that she walked to work every day at Berman's, rain or shine, she was there. So you see, it was still red brick. And then what happened is one of our ladies, one of our women, came down with her painter and painted it white. And that's how Temple Beth-El got to be white instead of red brick. And I just thought that I would close this out with something beautiful. This is Temple Beth-El, a picture I just took about 2 weeks ago. Years and years ago, they had financial problems, and some of the members, the board, discussed taking down the tower because it leaked. And I am so grateful that that tower was not removed, because I personally have stood outside that building hundreds of times and looked at that tower on that sky. And so that's our historical building in downtown Anniston on 13th and Quintard. And that is it. If there are any questions, I was still hoping that I might have what was written on the cornerstone, but unfortunately I do not. It was probably more evident in a photograph. And if anybody has any questions or a comment, there were other Jewish merchants in Anniston. I think I'm going to flip this back so we can look at this picture if it'll come up. There were other Jewish merchants. There was a Lippman, and there were Yalovitz, and many others. I just didn't have pictures of the stores to comment on them. But Yalovitz had a house where Merrill Lynch was maybe 2 buildings back, and they called it the Zalowo House, and it seems that Bud Owsley wrote a song about it. So there were many, many more Jewish merchants than I've showed you today. These are the ones that I could find the most interest in newspapers, and maybe somewhere in directories, or there were not pictures in the Russell brothers. But I have said at one point that there were so many Jewish merchants here that they basically decided what we wore in Anniston, Alabama for so many years. The gentleman who owned the liquor store had to leave because Anniston went dry and there was nothing for them to do there, so they left. And just about all of the families, the early families, left but the Sternes. And they had a wonderful family of Neil Sterne, that many of y'all know, and Miss Dorothy Sterne, Miss Caroline Sterne, Leon Sterne. They had a wonderful family that did a lot for Anniston. Many of them did move on. The Bermans did stay here and have the Berman Museum. And Mr. Routman died here, and Mr. Gordon died here, but their families have all moved off, so our population is not huge, but I believe that we made a difference in the history of Anniston, Alabama. It's 10 minutes till 3, so I guess I get to stop. Does anybody have a question? No questions? Well, if you think of a question, send it to Teresa. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope at some point later that we might look at some of these people in detail. They all had fascinating lives. Now we know what they did here and what their businesses look like, but Anniston was graced with many, many beautiful buildings. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you for my director over there, Shane, that helps me get started on time and keeps film rolling and gets it on YouTube. And if you know anybody that's interested in early Anniston history, please tell them to give us a look on Facebook or on the library's YouTube page. Thank you. Glad to have you here today.